Deep in the grandest hospital of Vienna, cries of despair once echoed endlessly. The maternity wards of that era were not cradles of life, but gateways to death. Countless young mothers would fall into unexplained high fevers and agony after childbirth, eventually passing away in hopelessness. People called it childbed fever, attributing it to foul air or the movement of the stars. It was not until a young man named Ignaz Semmelweis appeared. Tonight, let us sit by the gently flickering fire and walk through the true story of his life. This man uncovered the truth behind death, yet was labeled insane by the elites of his time. He died miserably in the dark corner of an asylum, while the simple hand-washing he insisted on has now become common sense, protecting lives all over the world. Why did the light of truth take half a century to pierce through the fog of human arrogance? The crack in his fate began in 1846 at Vienna's first maternity clinic. Ignaz Semmelweis was never a rebel born to challenge authority. He was merely an overly honest, even somewhat clumsy doctor. Every day he watched healthy mothers enter the hospital, only to turn into cold corpses within days. This impact gnawed at his heart relentlessly. A strange contrast existed between the clinics. The first clinic, run by doctors and medical students, suffered an alarmingly high maternal mortality rate, while the neighboring second clinic, attended by midwives, had a far lower death toll. The gap was so stark that women in the streets would kneel and beg not to be sent to the first clinic. Semmelweis fell into deep sorrow, writing in his notes, "Everything is unsolvable, everything is doubt. Only the growing number of corpses in the wards is real." He began frantically searching for answers, comparing everything from bed placements to the ringing of priests' bells, even the sleeping postures of new mothers. His relentless pursuit of truth set him apart from the elegant, complacent medical authorities of his time. The medical establishment then believed death was God's will or caused by mysterious miasma, and doctors bore no responsibility. But to Semmelweis, every passing life was an unstopped murder. The turning point came with a sudden tragedy. Semmelweis's friend Professor Kolechka accidentally cut his finger with a scalpel during an anatomy lesson. Days later, the professor passed away, his symptoms identical to those of mothers dying from childbed fever. In that moment, a revelation struck Semmelweis like thunder. Death was carried to the maternity beds by the very hands of doctors. Physicians back then had a terrible routine. After dissecting corpses full of germs, they would examine pregnant women directly with hands still stained and tainted by the stench of the dead. In an age unaware of bacteria, doctors even took pride in the blood and odor on their hands, seeing it as a mark of experience. Semmelweis realized invisible particles from corpses were spreading death through medical hands. He enforced strict rules for all doctors and students to wash their hands in chlorinated lime solution before entering the wards. The liquid was pungent, and even burned the skin, yet Semmelweis insisted everyone wash until no trace of the corpse's smell remained. Within a month of the new rule, the mortality rate plummeted sharply, dropping from 18% to 2%, eventually falling to an astonishing 0%. It should have been one of medicine's greatest victories. Yet within Vienna's medical circle, it was seen as an unforgivable insult. The scales of power tipped against the side of truth. When Semmelweis excitedly shared his discovery with mentors and colleagues, he received no praise, only outrage from the entire elite class. These respected, well-dressed physicians felt humiliated. According to Semmelweis's logic, these revered healers had unknowingly been spreading death all along. "Are you calling us murderers?" became the mainstream counterargument from the medical authorities. Rather than admitting their own negligence and unclean hands, the scholars clung to vague old theories. Semmelweis was never a tactful man. Faced with professional arrogance, he began using harsh words like murderers and accomplices, ignoring the truth in his letters. His fierce confrontation left him completely isolated in Vienna. When his contract expired, it was not renewed, forcing him to leave Vienna and return to his hometown Budapest. There he continued promoting hand-washing protocols, and statistics repeatedly proved him right, yet medical authorities across Vienna and Europe chose to ignore him completely. More than a decade of neglect and suppression slowly eroded his mental stability. Walking the streets of Budapest, he would suddenly grab strangers by the hands, begging them to tell every pregnant woman to wash their hands. His gaze grew wild, the aftermath of shouting truth into the wilderness for far too long. The story moves toward its most heartbreaking ending. By 1865, Semmelweis's behavior had grown increasingly erratic. He publicly condemned doctors who refused to accept his hand-washing theory in newspapers, branding them enemies of humanity. Under immense pressure, his family and friends made a cruel decision. They tricked him into traveling back to Vienna. Believing he was going to visit a new clinic, he was instead led straight to the gates of an asylum. Realizing he had been betrayed, he tried to escape, only to be violently pinned down by guards and locked in a dim cell. He sustained injuries during the struggle, and ironically, his wounds became infected, leading to sepsis. The illness was fundamentally the same evil he had spent his life fighting against: childbed fever. In his final days there were no flowers or tributes, only cold stares from beyond the iron bars. In his last moments, he likely stared down at his own hands. Those hands, scarred and cracked from endless washing with chlorinated lime, could never cleanse the arrogance of his era. When he died, newspapers printed only a brief obituary, and medical leaders did not even attend his funeral. Nothing changed after his passing. Mothers still died in droves on operating tables reeking of decay. The hero named Ignaz Semmelweis faded silently into the dust of history, carrying endless grievance and unfulfilled redemption. 20 years after Semmelweis's death, Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch finally revealed the existence of bacteria under the microscope. The world suddenly remembered the obstetrician who had outlined the contours of truth through intuition and data long before anyone else. He was finally venerated as the savior of mothers, with a statue erected in a Budapest square. But the price he paid was one of history's saddest tragedies. Every simple handwashing we do today is a silent tribute to him. He sacrificed his sanity and his life to secure peace for countless mothers and later generations. Now the story comes to an end. Picture the quiet nights of Vienna, the persistent figure wandering the wards carrying his bucket of chlorinated lime. At last he may pause, sit by the fire, and rest. Truth may be late, but it will eventually shine upon every corner. May we carry the relief after this heavy tale, drifting gently into peaceful dreams on this quiet night. Good night.